My next guest is, she's had a varied career, starting as a mathematician and then as a journalist. But that all changed when she made the bold statement that men can't be women. She wrote a book called Trans, where ideology meets reality, and is now one of the directors at Sex Matters, a UK group which advocates for sex-based rights. Helen Joyce joins me in the Rhema studio. Helen, hello, thank you for your time today.
Oh, thank you, and thank you for having me on. It's great to be here in New Zealand and meet you in person.
It is quite the story, and honestly, you're probably as surprised as anybody that you've ended up in this particular place. What has led you to be in the space that you're at now, Helen?
I mean, really the thing that happens to a lot of journalists, which is that you stumble upon a story that you think is so wild you can't let it go. So for me, it happened in 2017. I was asked, while I was a staff journalist at The Economist, to either write or find someone to write an article about the fact that children are identifying as trans, which is not something I'd heard anything about. And basically, I just got so interested in this idea that what it means to be a man or a woman is self-declaration rather than biology, and all the ramifications of that for individuals, for medicine, for society, for women's rights, for children's well-being, etc., that I couldn't give it up. I just kept looking and I kept researching. I ended up writing about it as a journalist, and then in 2020 I wrote a book which came out in 2021.
Why is this such a sticky issue for you? Why is this so vital to you personally, and of course your thoughts on why this is such a vital issue for us as a society?
Sure. I mean, a lot of the people who get interested in this, they come in either because of women's rights or because of child safeguarding or sometimes gay people's rights, because obviously we can't have a sexual orientation if we don't have a sex.
Yeah.
For me, it was really the background that you mentioned in mathematics. I noticed that if you say trans women are women or a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman, then what you're saying in effect is a circular definition.
Yeah.
And I just thought to myself, how can that be getting embedded in law? Because it's not a real definition. I thought, what does that mean for things like women's sports, women's spaces, for all the things where men and women are actually different, like in medicine.
Yep.
And it just bothered me so much logically that I felt I had to really understand what they were saying and why and what the ramifications were, just to stop myself feeling like I was going mad. So maybe not a usual reason that people get into this, but it was mine.
But from a mathematical, from a biological, from a linguistic point of view, it didn't make sense to you. But for so many other people, the path of least resistance was to keep your mouth shut, to keep your eyes down, to make sure that you don't step on people's pronouns. But obviously, that's not your character. You're quite happy to pick a fight in this space?
I'm not a very fighty person by nature, but I just didn't realise that I was picking a fight, to be honest. I was doing exactly the same as I had done in every other piece of journalism I had ever done. I just asked questions in good faith and tried to understand the answers, and the response that I got was completely different than on any other topic.
Yep.
I reached out to our best-known charity for gay people's rights, Stonewall in the UK, and said, "Hi, I see you're promoting gender self-ID," which is this idea that you are whatever you say you are. Mm-hmm. Isn't that a bit of a problem for women's spaces? And they sent me an extremely rude email back and blocked me on Twitter.
Wow.
And that's not something I had ever seen on any other topic. So that intrigued me actually in itself. The pushback when you're just doing ordinary journalism made me think, ooh, there's really something here, like spidey senses are tingling.
Yeah.
And I was already too deeply into it to get back out before I realised just how vicious that side can be to anyone who questions their dogma.
Why do you think the proponents of gender ideology of self-selection are so aggressive, are so dogmatic?
Because it's solely linguistic. There's nothing else to it. There is no sense in which a man can be a woman except that he says he's a woman, and vice versa, of course, for a woman who says she's a man. So if you want to make that the norm in society, you require everybody else to play along. And that means you must police their language. You must force them to see things or say that they see things the way you do. And also the only way to give life in the world to this notion that you're really a woman is that you must use women's spaces, because there isn't anything else that you can do. Yeah. So you must trample on other people's rights and you must force them to accept it and shut up. So it is fundamentally an anti-free speech, anti-freedom of belief movement. That is what it is at its core. It's not, this is a feature. It's not a bug.
This is something which is still taking people by surprise, because this entire process has affected our society relatively quickly. People are still catching up on what exactly has happened here. Quite a fundamental change to our definition of what it means to be woman, what it means to be a man, and the rights and protections that go with that. I mean, I know there's people that have various conspiracy theories on this, but what is driving this? Where does it come from, in your view?
I see why people have conspiracy theories on it, because it is so odd, and it did seem to come from nowhere. But honestly, it is not a conspiracy. What it is a perfect storm.
Yep.
There have been a bunch of things that all came together. Just to briefly name a few of them: postmodernism,
Yep.
which denies that there is any sort of reality out there, and that each of us has our own reality, and we get to pick that. I mean, I'm simplifying, but you know what I mean.
Yep.
Social media, which has meant that ideas can spread without any mediating institutions, and in particular spread between children without any adults seeing what's going on. And then the last factor I'd pick out, and there are several, is that there were well-established lobby groups with very good names that had worked, some of them for black civil liberties and then for gay rights, and they had run out of causes when gay marriage was won. They were looking for a new cause because otherwise they would have gone bust. So they just adopted gender self-ID. I'm thinking of the ACLU, Human Rights Campaign, GLAAD in America, in the UK Stonewall, and I'm sure you have New Zealand equivalents.
Yeah, no, we do. It is very interesting, the alliances that have formed on both sides of this debate. Groups that perhaps formerly would have said, we don't really have much in common ideologically or philosophically or even theologically with this group of people. But some strange alliances on both sides of this debate in terms of people who are strongly in favour of gender ideology and say, hey, this is a human right, we must push this through. And for those people who are saying, this is ridiculous and I don't care if it costs me my career.
I think it's one of the best things about working in this field is these odd and interesting and enlightening and actually very heartening reaching across divides.
Yep.
So, I mean, I was brought up Catholic and I have family members and friends who are Catholic in Ireland still. So I don't have any issue with people who are religious, although I am not myself religious. But I know that many women who work in the women's rights space in the UK and think of themselves as left-wing would dislike right-wing people and would dislike, Christians, to be honest, and would not necessarily want to work with them. But now there's these fantastic cross-party groups working together, working with Christian lawyers, working with Christian campaigners and churches. I mean, I'll give you a little example. I was in Australia before I came to New Zealand, and the city of Melbourne cancelled the booking that the women made in a city venue for me to speak because a man who has he, him pronouns complained and said that he would feel unsafe and that I would cause lack of safety. Me, a very ordinary middle-aged woman who hasn't slapped anyone in anger since I was about 3, I think. So a Christian church actually said that we could use their space instead. That was arranged by the Australian Christian lobby. And I thought to myself, on paper you'd think that I would have more in common with the City of Melbourne's public function because it's statutorily meant to be non-discriminatory for everybody. And instead, here's this Christian church giving space to a group that's basically a bunch of rad femme lesbians. And I just really like that. And I think that means that both of those groups will understand each other and like each other a bit better and have more feeling of common humanity and shared purpose. Like it's taking down divides and taking down misconceptions between groups.
There is an aspect about that, which is, honestly, it's good for society. It's good for the church.
Yes.
Honestly, to say, hey, let's recognise the humanity, the value that everybody brings to this conversation.
Absolutely, and the other way around too.
Yeah, exactly, and particularly because it is so divisive. There's a lot of hate, there's a lot of name calling, there's a lot of changing the meanings of words here. There'll be some people that just look at just how difficult it is to have a civil conversation with somebody who has a different view than them on this and perhaps a range of other different issues. Palestine, anyone?
Yeah.
However, do you think that perhaps as a society we've lost the argument on this one? The horse has bolted. We've had ideological capture within our key institutions. Is this a done deal?
No, it can't be. It mustn't be. I mean, it's too important for that. We can't give up child safeguarding, honesty in education, supporting children to develop fully. Yep. We can't give up women's rights like that. So we just have to keep fighting. And I actually am really certain that we will win. I mean, there's several elements to the fight. And one we could pick out would be gender medicine, in particular gender medicine for children. Yep. I am absolutely certain that what they call gender affirming care, which isn't care, when you go into a clinic and you say, my 3-year-old or my 7-year-old is a non-binary or is the opposite sex or whatever it is that child says, and the clinician says yes, and then puts them on a medicalised pathway that will lead to certain sterility and other damages in adult life, I'm absolutely certain that will be looked back on with the same horror as eugenics, because that was progressive too.
Yeah.
That was a word that people were proud to say. They were proud to say they were eugenicists. I think people would say a gender-affirming doctor with the same horror that they say eugenicist.
There is this huge divide socially, but when we look at, I suppose, the different aspects of society, politically, medically, in the education space and in the workspace and HR departments and those sorts of things, these areas of society, each one seems to have fallen to gender ideology. And, not wanting to be too pessimistic in this space, but where do you even start in terms of being able to turn back this social experiment when there has been so much ideological capture in each one of these significant institutions?
That's a great question. And I don't know if you know that people sometimes call the UK TERF Island. So TERF stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. I'm not exclusionary of anyone. Yes, I'm a feminist, but I'm not a radical feminist. It just means a woman who says that men can't be women. So TERF Island, we're about, I would say, 7 or 8 years ahead of you in the fight back against this, for various happenstance reasons. I can tell you that from our experience, the place you start is with freedom of speech and belief.
Okay.
We all have protections. You, as New Zealanders, have protections for your freedom of speech and belief at work, and they have been overridden by rules put in place by this ideology. But your protections are still there. You're going to have to take a bunch of legal cases, I'm afraid, and it's going to be no fun. Then when you can establish the right to speak about this issue at work, you can start to use that right to advocate for sex-based rights. So when I talk about the fact that men can't be women, I'm not just doing that for the fun of it. I'm doing it because I wanted to say, and that means this particular man cannot come into women's spaces.
Yep.
So then you get that back. And then finally, with that, you can start to think about the gender medicine as a whole, because the premise of gender medicine is to create human beings who can pass as the opposite sex. But if they can't use the opposite sex as spaces, that's no good.
Yep.
So I think it's incremental, just as the damage was. We have to work our way backwards through the things that they did and get them back out that way.
It is very topsy-turvy that the word bigotry and hatred and exclusion and all those sorts of terms are used in the opposite way to exclude and to take people's rights from them. Now, I suppose as a faith community, we've got a bit of a dodgy track record, and honestly, this can quickly look like just another thing we're against. That this is another thing that the conservative right is bigoted about.
Yes.
But hey, as you say, now anybody can be called a bigot or a TERF. Anyone who stands up to protect women's rights. How do we get that balance right, I suppose, taking a stand on this one without coming across as, hey, another thing that the conservatives are bigoted about?
It's interesting, isn't it? And a lot of women, especially left-wing women that I work with, they're very anxious that exactly what you say will happen, that if they are seen at all to share even one idea with right-wing people or with Christians, and that idea is as simple as the fact that there are two sexes and sex can't change, that they will be written off as, racist, sexist, homophobic, wanting to go back to the 1950s where women are in the kitchen, yada, yada, yada,
Yep.
I just think that you can't allow that to shape what you do too much. You have to have your own principles and you have to speak your own truth within those principles. And if you do that clearly and stick to your knitting, so don't allow yourself to be dragged off away from your cause, like we just talk about sex-based rights, nothing else, then over time it just becomes clear that the reason that so many disparate groups are saying this one thing is that it just happens to be true.
Yeah.
And if I'm not to speak on right-wing or Christian media, basically I wouldn't speak at all. So they've put you in a catch-22. If you speak on these media, they say, oh, you're right-wing and conservative. I'm not left-wing, by the way. I'm pretty centrist. And then if you say no to those, you don't speak anywhere. They're happy either way,
Yeah.
I just think if somebody agrees with me on this, isn't obnoxious in other ways, I'll speak to them and the message will get out.
Is it possible, in your experience, to have reasonable conversations with empathy and grace with people who have strongly held views about gender ideology? Have we lost the art of doing that?
I mean, I'm the wrong person to ask because everybody knows my views because my name is against a book. So most people on the other side won't talk to me, which makes doing events very difficult.
Yep.
Because often people who run events, like the heuristic, which is a good one, is get someone from both sides.
Yeah.
But as soon as my name is on it, people on the other side won't speak. And then often the debate collapses. So this is a strategy known as empty chairing.
Yeah.
Like they can pull the whole event by refusing to speak. I hear from people who, whose views aren't so well known or who are trying to talk to family and friends that it is pretty fraught.
Yep.
Because often what happens is the person you're talking to has a personal connection. It's often a child or a friend or a relative who is themselves trans-identifying, or they have a child who is.
Yep.
And that person has bought into a worldview that they now can't renege on in any way.
Yep.
And they have to use psychological defences that what you're saying is simply beyond the pale. Mm-hmm. It's really not like anything else. Like if you think about, until recently at least, you accepted that other people voted differently than you, had different religions than you. I had friends and do still have friends who are everything from, Corbynista left-wingers to, fairly free market fundamentalist or libertarian. We could work together. Yeah. This one seems somehow to be treated as if, any dissent is bigotry, as you say. And I'm not really quite sure why.
You touched on something there, and in particular for family members, for especially parents of transgender children, as they would describe themselves. They've committed a lot. These are people who, if we're extending charity and grace, there is a brokenness here. And it would be difficult for those people to step back ideologically from the decisions that they've made and the unconditional support that they've given to somebody that they sincerely and truly love.
It's the most horrible thing to think about. I'm so sorry for anyone who is put in this position, because you genuinely are in a terrible, there's a terrible binary choice for you. You can't go along the middle forever. You are going to have to come off on one side or the other. And the trans lobby groups have convinced a lot of people and a lot of institutions, and in particular the mainstream media, that if a child says they have a trans identity and you do not immediately affirm them, that child is a serious risk of self-harm or even suicide. Yeah. I mean, that is an emotional blackmail technique. So many parents have gone along with something that otherwise they might have thought made no sense.
Is there any research, is there any documentation to show that this is the case?
There's documentation to show it is not the case, you'll be glad to hear. So that's a big relief. Like, nobody wants to be hearing that children who are vulnerable or in distress are at such risk. It was never a true thing to say. It never had any basis. But very recently, some high-quality research has come out in both the UK and Finland that shows that once you control for other factors, so children who say that they're trans and end up in gender clinics are typically children who have other sources of distress. Yeah. They may be on the autistic spectrum, they may have experienced family breakdown, they may be self-harming or have eating disorders, that sort of thing. So once you wash all of that out, there's no extra self-harm or suicidality or suicide just from the gender distress. Yeah. So that should give parents some relief, because they should understand then that they don't need to rush into this affirmative approach. But if you don't, you'll be told by teachers, doctors, the media, and probably your child who has learned these scripts online that you are hateful, that you want them dead, that you are a bigot, a dinosaur who's going to have to die out. And if the child is a bit older, like old enough to leave home, quite commonly those children believe that you're so hateful, and they may even be told this by a therapist, that they should cut you off. Yeah. So parents are put in a horrific position. And if they decide to get with the programme, then the cognitive dissonance requires that they decide that the other path was terrible and wrong. And that means they must think that people like me are terrible and wrong. I have been called the worst things I have been called by parents who have taken the other path.
Yeah. There is a brokenness there. There is parents that are trying their best with the information they've been given, some of that by bad actors with their own agendas, but still, I suppose, caught in the crossfire of this ideological war are vulnerable, broken families, children in particular, who are offered false and dangerous hope in this space. That the war of words in this space is dangerous, but I suppose that vulnerable children are being used as ammunition is horrific.
I mean, as I said, I was brought up Catholic, and I still sometimes turn to the language of the Bible because I can't express how evil some of this is any other way.
Yep.
And one of the quotes that comes to mind is, "Better that you tie a millstone around your neck and cast yourself into the sea than that you harm a head on the head of one of these children."
Wow.
Because I cannot express the disgust I feel for somebody who would lie to a child, and it is a lie to say that it's possible to do things to your body that make you in any sense the opposite sex. And instead these people should be saying to the child, with love and empathy, what is it that you mean when you say that you're really a boy? Like, is that a girl who's got some very weird sexist ideas about what it is to be a girl or a boy and thinks she isn't allowed to be herself?
Yeah.
Is she trying to express fear and loathing of going through puberty, which is not an uncommon feeling, in particularly in a pornified culture where girls know what boys are looking at? There's all sorts of other reasons. Or, autism spectrum disorders often cause feelings of bodily dissociation.
Yeah.
There's so many things it could be, and that somebody could help you to grow up into the body that is the only body you're going to get. Or they can lie to you and tell you that you're broken in some fundamental way, that you need to fix your body because there's something wrong with the way that you are. I just cannot get over something that I can only call evil without doing the second.
Helen, you talked about how in the UK you're perhaps a little bit further down the road to this, both in terms of the ideological capture of universities, but also and various institutions, but also the pushback on this. From your experience, from what you've seen in New Zealand, is it inevitable that we go down the road of the UK? Can we turn the tide before we get as deep into the mire?
You're very deep in the mire, and nothing is inevitable. It's very easy to fall into the idea that there's a tide to people's affairs, but that's seen in hindsight. You look back and you think, oh, it was inevitable women got the vote, or it was inevitable whatever happened. That was actual individuals working night and day over years and decades sometimes. We absolutely have to do the work. The reason I say that I think you're about 7 years behind is there's a particular case that's on at the moment with LAVA, which is Lesbian Action Visibility Aotearoa, and they were not allowed to have a stand at Wellington Pride because they were regarded as TERFs. They weren't even trying to say anything about trans. They were literally just putting up a map of locations that had lesbian significance in Wellington.
Yeah.
And so they were barred, and they've taken a case saying that's unlawful discrimination. And there has been no media coverage. There's been completely mad things, I think, happening in court, but we're not allowed to know because there's been a reporting blackout.
Yeah.
That case, to me, is very equivalent to a case that was brought in the UK in 2018 by the CEO of the charity that I work at, Sex Matters. Her name's Maya Forstatter, and she took an employment discrimination case because she said in her workplace that she thought the government should not introduce gender self-ID. It was considering doing so at the time.
Yep.
She lost her job because of that, and it took her 4 years to win a case in the employment tribunal as a result. There was no media coverage for her first hearing either.
Yep.
I think that you're about there, and you have to get to the point that you establish that it is protected under your employment law to say this sort of thing, because nobody speaks, hardly anyone anyway speaks, if their job is at risk.
Yeah. Very much appreciate what you have to say on such an important topic. As we mentioned beforehand, free speech is where it starts. This is the time to take a stand. Yes, there will be pushback. Yes, it will be uncomfortable. There may be sacrifices that we need to make in this space, but such an important conversation. A guest in New Zealand of the Free Speech Union. You've got a range of different events that you'll be speaking at over this week. Of course, fsu.nz for more information about that. But Helen, wonderful to meet you, to chat with you today. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.